October 13, 1973, Day 7 of the Yom Kippur War. Two pilots board an aircraft at Griffith Air Force Base in upstate New York. Their mission isn't on any flight schedule. Their destination doesn't appear in any briefing. 10 hours and 4 aerial refuelings later, they land back in New York with photographs of every Soviet ship in the eastern Mediterranean, every Syrian armor column on the Golan Heights, and every Egyptian position on the west bank of the Suez Canal. That mission is now declassified. Dozens of others from the same program are not. Some of the men who flew them died without ever being allowed to say where they went. This is the story of the missions the CIA and the United States Air Force still won't talk about. To understand the missions, you have to understand the aircraft. And to understand the aircraft, you have to understand what the United States needed in 1960. On May 1, 1960, a Soviet SA-2 missile knocked Francis Gary Powers' U-2 spy plane out of the sky over Sverdlovsk. The United States had just lost its only window into Soviet strategic capability. The U-2 flew at 70,000 feet. It wasn't high enough anymore. It wasn't fast enough anymore. The Eisenhower administration needed something the Soviets couldn't touch. The Central Intelligence Agency went to Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects Division, the team known as Skunk Works, and gave them a brief that bordered on science fiction. Build an aircraft that flies at 3 times the speed of sound, at altitudes above 85,000 feet, with a radar cross-section smaller than a Piper Cub. Kelly Johnson and his engineers delivered it. They called the CIA's version the A-12 OXCART. The Air Force version that came later, the one most of us know, they called the SR-71 Blackbird. The numbers are still hard to believe. Top speed, Mach 3.3, over 2,200 miles per hour. Operational ceiling, above 85,000 feet, the edge of space. The titanium airframe expanded so much in flight from friction heating that on the ground, the fuel tanks leaked. They were designed to leak. The metal only sealed at altitude. Over its 32-year operational life, more than 4,000 surface-to-air missiles were fired at SR-71s and their CIA predecessors. None ever connected. Not one. The standard evasion maneuver was simple. Light the afterburners and climb. Nothing could catch it. But this isn't a video about the airplane. This is a video about what the airplane did. And most of that is still classified. Most viewers think the SR-71 flew the Vietnam War. It didn't. Not the early missions. The aircraft that flew first wasn't an SR-71 at all. It was its predecessor, the CIA's A-12 OXCART, and the operation was called Black Shield. In May 1967, 3 A-12s deployed to Kadena Air Base on Okinawa. The cover story was a weather research detachment. The real mission, authorized by President Lyndon Johnson, was photographic reconnaissance of North Vietnam, specifically to confirm or deny the existence of surface-to-surface missile sites that the White House feared were being installed around Hanoi. The first Black Shield mission flew on May 31, 1967. Pilot Mele Vojvodich took off from Kadena, refueled over the South China Sea, and entered North Vietnamese airspace at over 80,000 feet, doing Mach 3.1. The cameras photographed 70 of the 190 known surface-to-air missile sites in the country, plus 9 other priority targets. Total time inside hostile airspace, 12 minutes and 29 seconds. What the imagery showed changed the war. There were no surface-to-surface ballistic missiles around Hanoi. The fear that had been shaping American bombing restraint, gone. President Johnson's national security team adjusted Rolling Thunder targeting based partly on Black Shield product. Over the next 10 months, A-12s flew 26 missions over North Vietnam and 2 over North Korea. On June 5, 1968, A-12 pilot Jack Weeks vanished over the Philippine Sea on a functional check flight. Neither he nor the aircraft was ever found. His name didn't appear on any public memorial for decades. His widow was told he was working for the government. That was all she was told for years. The 2 North Korean missions came after the January 1968 Pueblo crisis, when North Korea seized a U.S. Navy intelligence ship. The A-12 overflights photographed the Pueblo at her mooring in Wonsan Harbor and mapped North Korean military mobilization. It was the first time American leadership had real-time imagery of the crisis. The Joint Chiefs used those photographs to argue against immediate military retaliation. Black Shield arguably prevented a second Korean War. In June 1968, less than a month after Jack Weeks disappeared, the entire A-12 program was terminated. The aircraft were flown to storage in Palmdale, California. The CIA's brief tenure as an operator of strategic reconnaissance aircraft was over. The Air Force's SR-71, already operational since 1966, took over every mission. The CIA's role was scrubbed from public reference, and most of the Black Shield records stayed classified until 2007. Some still are. Here's the official line, repeated in every Air Force fact sheet, every museum placard, every authorized history book. The SR-71 never overflew the Soviet Union. The qualifier doing the work in that sentence is the word overflew, because the SR-71 absolutely flew alongside the Soviet Union, constantly, from the day it entered service to the day it retired. These were called peripheral reconnaissance missions. The aircraft would fly a precise line that stayed in international airspace, often by only a few miles, and use side-looking radar and oblique cameras to image deep into Soviet territory. From 85,000 feet, the camera angles allowed coverage of targets 100 miles inland. You didn't need to fly over Murmansk to photograph Murmansk. You just needed to fly past it at Mach 3. The Soviets understood exactly what was happening. They tried to stop it. The MiG-25 Foxbat was developed in large part to counter the SR-71. It couldn't. The later MiG-31 Foxhound, fielded from 1981, was the first Soviet interceptor that could even theoretically engage a Blackbird, and even then, only under perfect geometry. Soviet pilots have described in post-Cold War interviews trying to set up firing solutions on Blackbirds off the Kola Peninsula. None ever succeeded. So the official record says no overflights. But Cold War aircrews have given conflicting accounts. Some swear they never crossed the line. Others, speaking only after retirement and often without specifics, have implied that on a small number of occasions, mission planning included routes that did cross. The records that would resolve the question remain classified under Executive Order 13,526. Specific mission folders from the late 1970s and early 1980s are sealed. The aircraft flew from 3 operational locations: Beale Air Force Base in California, Kadena in Japan, and RAF Mildenhall in England. The Mildenhall Detachment, Detachment 4, flew most of the European Soviet-facing missions. We know roughly when they flew. We know roughly where they flew. We don't always know what they were tasked to photograph. The targets in many of those mission folders are still blacked out. The local population in Suffolk could hear the takeoffs. Residents around RAF Mildenhall described the SR-71 launch as the loudest peacetime sound they ever heard. Sometimes those takeoffs happened in the middle of the night. Sometimes they happened during Warsaw Pact exercises. The correlation is on the public record. The mission tasking is not. On October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated surprise attack on Israel. By day 3, Israeli forces were taking catastrophic losses on both fronts. By day 6, the Israeli government was, by some later accounts, privately considering nuclear contingencies. The United States needed to know what was actually happening on the ground. Israeli intelligence was understandably focused on survival, not on sharing complete pictures with Washington. Soviet satellite intelligence was unavailable. American satellite coverage at the time was limited by orbital geometry. The decision came down from the Nixon White House. Launch an SR-71 mission over the war zone. There was a problem. Israel didn't want it. The Israeli government formally objected to the United States overflying the conflict, fearing the photographs might be shared in ways Israel couldn't control. The State Department considered launching from a European base, but every NATO ally on the continent refused permission. Spain refused, Portugal refused, the United Kingdom refused. The mission would have to launch from the continental United States. Round-trip distance to the eastern Mediterranean from the east coast, more than 11,000 miles. Required aerial refuelings, 4. Mission duration, approximately 10 hours. The aircraft, SR-71 number 17979, staged from Griffiths Air Force Base in upstate New York. The KC-135Q tankers, modified specifically to carry the SR-71's exotic JP-7 fuel, pre-positioned across the Atlantic. The Blackbird took off, refueled over the Atlantic, refueled again near the Azores, made its high-speed photographic run across the entire eastern Mediterranean theater, refueled twice more on the way home. The product was extraordinary. Photographs of every Syrian armor concentration on the Golan Heights, Photographs of Soviet resupply ships unloading at the Syrian port of Latakia. Direct evidence of the scale of Soviet military involvement. Photographs of the Egyptian Third Army's exact positions on the east bank of the Suez Canal. The photographs that would later let Henry Kissinger negotiate the disengagement agreement because the United States knew, precisely, what each side held. The mission flew at least twice more during the war and its immediate aftermath. The imagery was hand-carried to the White House Situation Room. Kissinger used it as leverage in his shuttle diplomacy between Tel Aviv, Cairo, and Damascus. Neither side could lie to him about ground positions because he had photographs taken from 85,000 feet 2 hours earlier. Some of those photographs are now declassified. They're at the National Archives. Others, particularly the imagery of Soviet ships and Soviet personnel inside Syrian and Egyptian facilities, remain partially or fully redacted. The intelligence community has never explained why 50-year-old photographs of ships in a port require continued protection. You can draw your own conclusions about what's still in those folders. The SR-71 was retired in 1990, briefly reactivated in the mid-1990s, and finally retired for good in 1998. The A-12 record started seriously declassifying in 2007. The first major Yom Kippur mission imagery was released in 2008, and yet, in 2024, the National Reconnaissance Office denied a FOIA request for SR-71 mission tasking documents from 1981 to 1984, citing ongoing national security concerns. About a 40-year-old aircraft. That's not an accident. That's a signal. There's an oral history project among former Blackbird crews called Habu Tales. The unofficial rule among the pilots and reconnaissance systems officers who participated. You can talk about the cockpit, the takeoffs, the friendships, the close calls. You cannot talk about specific dates, specific targets, or specific tasking. Several contributors have stated, on the record, that there are missions they will take to their graves. We can identify some of the gaps. There are mission folders associated with the 1982 Lebanon War, the Israeli invasion, the Bekaa Valley air battle where Israel destroyed 19 Syrian SA-6 sites, the U.S. Marine barracks bombing in October 1983, that remain classified. We know SR-71s flew. We don't know what they photographed, or for whom. Operation El Dorado Canyon, April 1986. The U.S. strike on Libya in retaliation for the Berlin discotheque bombing. SR-71s flew the post-strike battle damage assessment from RAF Mildenhall. 2 were fired on by Libyan SA-5 missiles. Both returned safely. The post-strike imagery has been partially released. The pre-strike target development imagery has not. And then there are the late missions. From roughly 1988 until the program's first retirement in 1990, SR-71s flew an operational tempo that the public record does not fully account for. Pilot logbooks reference mission codes that don't appear in any unclassified history. Some of those flights happened during the final collapse of the Warsaw Pact, when the United States needed to monitor Soviet nuclear command and control during a moment of genuine political chaos. Those records are not coming out anytime soon. The SR-71 is now a museum piece. You can walk under one at the Smithsonian's Udvar Hazy Center in Virginia. You can stand beside one at the Imperial War Museum in Duxford. You can read the official histories, watch the documentaries, buy the pilot memoirs. What you cannot do is read the complete mission record. Not in 2026. Not almost certainly in 2036. Some of the men who flew the missions are still alive. Some are still bound by classification agreements they signed in the 1970s. Their stories will die with them, because the documents that would corroborate those stories remain locked in vaults at Fort Belvoir and Langley. If a 60-year-old aircraft still has secrets worth protecting, ask yourself what's being collected, right now, by aircraft and satellites we haven't been told exist. Ask yourself what those records will look like 50 years from now, when somebody else makes the documentary about the missions they still won't talk about. The Blackbird never lost a crew to enemy fire. It never lost an aircraft to enemy fire. It flew higher and faster than anything that came before it, and arguably anything that has come since. And it ran the most successful strategic reconnaissance program in human history. We just don't know, and may never know, most of what it actually did.